Welcome back to another video, ladies and gentlemen. Sending out a lot of love to my Lycans. 10 realistic survival games that truly test your might. Other than that, before we get started, you know the drill. Subscribe if you want to accept the bite, become a part of the bloodline, and join the Lycans. But if you want me to react to anything, links are down below. You could leave it in the comments too, and let's get started.
One of the best elements of a survival game is how real it feels. A lot of that comes from grounding certain elements.
What I want to say is a couple things in here. If Subsistence is not on this list in 7 days, and I think this right here is Green Hell. This kind of looks like Green Hell, but those are 3 of the hardest survival games I have played ever.
To the game in something that you might see in the real world, and a lot of the time that also means making it tough. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 realistic survival games that truly test your endurance. Starting off with number 10, it's Green Hell. Green Hell is basically the platonic ideal of what a realistic survival game is. There's nothing fantastical about it, it's just you against the elements. The Amazon rainforest is an unforgiving.
Do the elements include a tribe of native people that don't want you on their land? I don't think necessarily they don't want you there, but I think I think eventually, I don't know, I can't remember if they're hostile. He'll probably end up talking about it, so I'm just going to let him talk about it. But yeah, nah, it's not just the elements unless you include the civilization that's there as the elements.
Place where pretty much everything can kill you. Seriously, there are a lot of nasty status effects that come down within this game. If you don't boil water, you can get a parasitic infection, you can get scratches and abrasions from falling long heights. If you're moving through water sources, leeches can cling to your skin, and you can even get a rash if you come into contact with certain insects like ants and wasps. A big part of the gameplay of Green Hell is learning how to deal with the various ailments you're basically unable to avoid while traveling through the jungle. It's all these little things that won't necessarily kill you, but it can build up and really mess you up in the long run. Yeah, sanity is another important part of the game. All these illnesses can slowly erode your sanity, and if you can't do things to make yourself feel safe and healthy, your dude will just straight up lose the will to live. Of course, the game still has all your standard survival game elements like building a shelter, hunting animals, and there's even hostile Amazonian tribesmen you encounter. But for the most part, this game's about dealing with the more mundane parts of survival, which adds a real layer of realism and challenge to the entire experience. And number 9 is Medieval Dynasty. Here's a game that's very different from Green Hell, but is realistic in its own way. Instead of being
okay, so I've heard about Medieval Dynasty being hard. I've never played this, but from what I've seen, a little bit here and there, it looks intense. I think the biggest thing with realistic survival games is the micromanagement within the game. So for example, the little micromanagement in Green Hell was like the ailments and everything, and like I think that just makes a survival game hard, just no matter what game it is. As soon as they start adding the things that you have to literally take care of your character as if you're taking care of your real life like being,
a lone survivor trapped in an unfamiliar place, you play as a guy who leaves his war-torn home to travel north someplace safer and to start a new life in a verdant valley. You're not alone here at all, and in fact the entire point of the game is to create your own dynasty. Of course, as is standard in these types of games, you basically start out with just the clothes on your back, and from there you build up an entire settlement. You can build houses to attract new people to join your town, you can hunt, you can trade with already established settlements, and you can follow a fairly elaborate storyline that's part tutorial, part RPG questline. Medieval Dynasty is more streamlined in its survival mechanics compared to a lot of other games on this list, but what makes it so interesting is how you create your own village and all the mechanics around that. It's a little bit more forgiving in terms of survival than something like Green Hell, but that's because the survival of your main guy isn't the only thing you have to worry about. You have an entire town to think about, and that wrinkle makes this game a really interesting entry in the survival genre. And number 8 is Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey. Say what you want about this one.
They put that clip purposely for the memes, man. For the memes. Why didn't he just put the deer out of its misery? Jesus.
It's definitely unique. Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey is a very dense and complex game that can very easily become frustrating, but there's really nothing else like it out there. This is a game where your goal is nothing less than the evolution of mankind. You start out as an ape-like proto-human in the prehistoric past, and your goal is to gain knowledge, learn skills, and pass all that on to the next generation, so eventually you become human. It's a very ambitious idea, and that ambition can be seen in the entire game, because this thing plays like no other game I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a game with a knowledge button before, for instance. What makes this game so tough, especially at first, is you're pretty much starting at square one. Your ape guy knows pretty much nothing about the world, and the game does very little to explain anything to you. The actual controls are surprisingly responsive and controller friendly, but everything else is about as mysterious as it gets. This one definitely had a mixed response at first because it can be really unforgiving, which makes sense. You're playing as a wild animal and it's dog eat dog, but even compared to many other survival games, it can be hard to figure out what you're even supposed to do in this one because of how unique its controls are. Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey isn't for everyone, but there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with it, and it deserves a shout out at least.
Yeah.
And number 7 is
Could have been a no, it deserves a damn, it does. Damn, if you know what? I might dabble in doing like top 10 lists since I cover like a lot of videos that people recommend me. I might like I know of a lot of titles and stuff like that, so maybe I'll do like a top 10 list when I like play them or actually like check them out, or maybe, you know, just do a little bit of research into them. But if I ever did a realistic survival game list, you know, when you hear realistic survival games, I would have put that in an honorable mentions. I'm not gonna lie, because it's like realistic survival. My mind automatically goes to, well, realistic survival of a human. But I mean, it's not bad. Obviously, it's still a survival game, so it's not less. I'm not gonna be too
Project
nitpicky,
Zomboid.
but I am.
Here's a
at the same
game
time.
that has been in early access for what feels like forever, but the developers keep plugging away at it, and they make improvements, they add new scenarios. The premise itself isn't realistic. It's a zombie survival game, and obviously zombies don't exist, but what makes this game so great is it takes the premise and tries to make it as realistic.
Wait, and the ape one was it? Or the ape one was? Okay.
As possible, which is a long way to say that you're basically screwed. This game is tough, like incredibly tough. Just managing to stay alive for a few days feels like a big accomplishment. You play as a lone survivor at the very beginning of a zombie apocalypse, and the goal is to simply survive, which is much easier said than done. Zombies are relentless in this game, and it only takes a few of them to take you down. Close range encounters are incredibly tense because it doesn't just take a bite to kill you. Just a simple scratch can lead to long-term problems for you, especially with medical supplies being so rare. The graphics are very basic, sure, but the simulation is incredibly in-depth. There's an almost sim-style emotion tracker that shows the various feelings your character's going through, as well as a complex set of status screens that show you pretty much everything you could want to know about your dude's health. All this to say is that dying is pretty much
Why is he running towards? What's behind him?
It's to look at, but its complex and in-depth
he
systems
tripped.
make it probably the most realistic zombie game out there. And number 6 is Unreal World. One of the
I have to get that one. I keep seeing funny videos pop up in my recommended of people playing is it called Project Zomboid? Yeah. And more I think it's calling to me because I love these survival games. I really do. But damn, holy moly, that seems crazy. Dude tripped. I seen the status effects before because a video that popped up talked about the there was a funny video by a YouTuber, and it was, we took every negative status effect. Well, I think they did, but then they ended up playing with friends. I thought it was a solo playthrough, but it was like, we'll see how long everybody survives. It was great.
Kings of the survival genre, a strange and very old school experience that's beloved by many for its simulation elements. In a lot of ways, the game is basically Dwarf Fortress combined with a survival game. That's the level of intense simulation we're talking about here. When you start out, your chosen character is dropped into an entirely simulated fictional world. It's a fantasy, but don't expect a lot of fantastical elements, especially at first, because this is an in-depth survival experience where However, just doing something basic like catching a squirrel is a challenging experience. The interface definitely takes some getting used to. To call it archaic would be an understatement, but once you get the hang of the unusual controls, it eventually starts to make at least a certain amount of sense. You can hunt, build a settlement, become a tradesman, a fisher, or even a warrior. You can train dogs to help you as well, which makes hunting much easier.
That sounds
Basically,
cool.
if you want to do something in this world, you're free to do it, but survival doesn't come easy. The game simulates everything from minor wounds to frostbite on individual limbs, and it can be very hard to come back from any...
See, and that's what's cool, because games that look like this, not that I don't even dislike the style. I kind of like how it's like simple, and this simple style allows them to add even more ridiculous things. Not ridiculous things because it's like realistic realistic to, I guess, like a point in period in time where we once were, but it's like all these status effects and everything. Like the more simple the game, like as in for, it's like, it's funny, the more simple visually but more complex mechanically it can get. I hope that made sense. But
any sort of severe injuries in this game. So while it's not much to look at, and just figuring out what's even happening at first...
Wait, sometimes, hang on. I know I'm pausing over what he's saying about it, but there's actually survival games where I would make the funny comments naturally. I'm over here stuttering because I'm over here trying to think about the games. But do you know, like, 7 Days is actually one of those games that's fresh on my mind, so let me just talk about it. The running for like fucking 2 seconds and then running out of stamina, that is the unrealistic part of some of these survival games that, I won't lie, is a bit annoying. Like where you're working up a stat from point zero, as if it would be hard for someone normal to like chop down a tree. Chopping down a tree. Me and my there was actually I actually filmed. I don't know why they ended up wanting to do this, but it was like a fun little school project. It was actually my old barber. This dude, he's an awesome dude. And it was like him and his friend, and I filmed them. We actually went out to the forest and they were chopping down a tree. And it's like, it was work, but they managed to like keep chopping, and keep going. And that made me think about the survival game where you'll do 3 axe swings and your character is dead tired. And I'm like, what? Or you'll run away and your character is dead tired after like 5 steps. That's the shit where it doesn't count as being realistic. You're grinding a stat from like 0.1. Like, though I'm not gonna lie, it is very rewarding after grinding out the stat to start getting better stats, if your survival game does that.
Take some getting used to. There's a reason this game is so well respected among survival game players. It's dense, it's tough, and when you finally figure out how to properly survive, it's very rewarding.
Oh.
And number 5 is The Forest.
That's the best for all the survival games. Once you figure it out and you start like getting the swing of things, I think these become the most rewarding games, because they just do.
To many of the other previous entries on this list, The Forest isn't quite as much of a realistic simulation. Compared to games like Green Hell, it's more of a horror game with survival elements rather than the other way around, but that doesn't stop.
I mean, people say that, but I don't really think The Forest is that scary. And not only that, I don't think The Forest is that hard. I hopped into The Forest. I bought it twice among 2 different accounts.
Stop it from being a great game. Unlike most of the entries on this list, this game actually has a pretty elaborate story where you play as a man whose flight crash lands on a mysterious island. You miraculously survive, but your son has gone missing, so the main goal of the game is to explore the island, uncover its secrets, and eventually rescue your kid. It's a big island, though, and
everything
if you want
is
to survive,
personal
you'll need
preference
to hunt
too.
for food and build a shelter so that you can safely hunker down at night. Now, it's not a complex survival simulation, but there's still plenty to worry about, because after you spend enough time on the island, the natives start to get sick of your presence and will come at night to kill you with more and more guys the longer you're around. So survival in this game isn't just about keeping yourself fed. You've also got to fend off attacks by grotesque monsters that inhabit an island. And if you think the guys on the surface are bad, wait until you see the things they keep underground. What makes The Forest so great is how it combines horror and survival. It's not the most realistic, but it's one of the most entertaining, and it can feel very realistic. If you want, you can always always turn off the native attacks and just play it as a standard survival game, and that works just as well too. And number 4 is RimWorld. This is a game that basically combines...
Don't turn off the native attacks. Because if you do, it does go back. It kind of goes to part of what I'm saying is the game not really being scary, but it's not. Surviving in that game is not too hard.
Survival with The Sims, usually to hilarious effect. Its developers call the game a storytelling tool, but most of the fun is really just seeing how things play out. In RimWorld, you start the game by creating a group of colonists, all with their own skills, abilities, positive personality traits, and negative personality traits, and then you plop them down somewhere on this giant map. From there, you can build a colony by collecting resources, building structures, and rescuing newly arrived colonists who can either be help or a gigantic burden, depending on their personality. That's the thing that really makes this game stand out, by the way. The interpersonal dramas and situations that can play out are almost entirely out of your hands. All you can really do is hand out orders and give your colonists a general idea about what they should be doing, but it's up to them if they actually do it or not. People get stressed when they're overworked, and they can get lazy or vengeful, just straight up broken if they get overwhelmed. And the AI systems that are in place for this game are really second to none, and it's those systems that make this game feel realistic. Yes, the graphics can take a little getting used to, and the actual command system can be somewhat confusing to new players, but it doesn't matter a whole lot because the real joy of the game is just seeing all of your people interact with each other. Usually it'll all end in disaster, but it's so much fun seeing things spiral out of control that it doesn't really matter. And number 3 is Scavenger, another weird one. It's a turn-based survival game with a story. Good luck actually seeing it through because it's absolutely brutal. It's set in a strange sort of post-apocalypse where your character wakes up from cryosleep to find themselves in a hostile world. You start with absolutely nothing but a hospital gown and a death wish, and you have to scavenge if you want to have any chance of surviving.
The controls in this seem complex too.
The game almost feels like the world's most elaborate choose-your-own-adventure book. You move on to tiles, get some text describing what's happening, and then you select your actions. Sometimes
so this one is similar to Unreal World in a way.
You can do changes dramatically depending on what skills your character has. Like if they're good at electronics, they can manipulate computers, or if they're a tracker, they can more easily stalk animals. The hex-based environment and limited series of actions makes it so that almost every action has some kind of consequence, with the scavenging being a central part of the gameplay. Like, you start out with nothing, and it's hostile out there, so it's actually essential that you get some clothes so you don't die from exposure, then a weapon to defend yourself. Like in Unreal World, this is another game with a very detailed combat simulation, where you're given lots of options to do, and most of them end in failure. This is a game that'll just constantly kick your ass, but it's uniquely compelling, and it makes you want to uncover its secrets, no matter how difficult it is. And number 2 is This War of Mine.
I'm actually really enjoying this list because it's there's games I've like never really seen, like Unreal World or Scavenger. I never heard of those.
Speaking of games that kick you up,
but those sound like challenges.
Down. This War of Mine is an incredibly bleak experience where you play as a group of normal people trying to survive a war in an unnamed Eastern European country. What makes this game stand out is that it's not depicting some fantastical scenario like a lot of the games on this list. You just play as normal people trying to survive during a particularly tough situation. As usual with these games, you basically start out with nothing. You need beds so people can get some decent rest, a stove to cook food, and a fire to keep warm, as well as food and medicine to keep everyone alive. During the day, your people hang out at their home, dealing with outsiders, both hostile and friendly, while at night you can either have your people sleep, stand guard, or go out to scavenge for supplies. Part of what makes this game so realistic is how it depicts these kinds of desperate scenarios. You don't just go and grab stuff from empty buildings. A lot of the time there are other scavengers, and you're never quite sure how things will go down. Sometimes people are friendly, sometimes they're not, they're hostile, and sometimes it's almost impossible to tell what the hell they want. There are soldiers who try to abuse their power, doctors just trying to help people, and wandering gangs who will rob you on sight. It's a tough game that's trying to depict a particularly tough situation, and depending on your character's actions, they can become depressed or even suicidal. Honestly, the whole thing's very bleak. Most games show wars through the eyes of the soldiers fighting in it, but this game shows how wars can affect common people, and yeah, it can be rough. And finally, at number 1, it's The Long Dark. Here's another survival game that's been in development for a very long time, but again, it's constantly getting updates and improvements. The Long Dark isn't the most realistic game on this list in terms of simulation, but few games capture the desperate feeling of survival quite like this one. Set in the remote reaches of Canada after a strange phenomenon takes out all the electricity in an area, your goal in the game is simply to survive.
I've heard of Long Dark also. I spoiled the end. There's a bonus. But I think bonus are the honorable mentions. So far, seeing this list and not seeing 7 days, that is a little bit crazy. 7 days is intense. Maybe they've done it in another top 10 video or Subsistence. And maybe because they're not fully done in a way, but they're definitely playable now and both receiving updates. So I don't know. I feel like 7 days, maybe they're in the honorable mentions. 7 days of Subsistence or no joke.
As the game goes on, the temperature continues to drop and dangerous animals like wolves and bears get increasingly desperate and aggressive, and all you can do is keep trying to survive.
Yeah.
The most important thing in the Long Dark is to keep warm, but everything is temporary. Clothes slowly break down from wear and tear, fires eventually burn out, and supplies are limited. You can only survive in one place for so long before being forced to move on, because once you pick a place clean, that's it. So while the actual survival simulation of the game isn't incredibly in-depth and complex, the constant need to repair and replenish your equipment
And
is
keep
always
moving.
putting you on the clock. Everything eventually breaks in this world, and you've got to be one step ahead if you want to actually survive. The experience of playing this game can be a bleak and lonely one, especially if you're just playing in sandbox mode. There's an entire campaign that's surprisingly fleshed out if you want a more guided experience, as well as challenge scenarios that add an extra layer to things. So there's definitely plenty of stuff to do here. It's a game that's laser focused on survival in a harsh winter environment, and while it's not as complicated as other survival games on this list, few games really capture the feeling of loneliness and desperation in the way this one does. Couple of bonus games for you. First, The Flame and the Flood. If you're looking for something a little different, The Flame and the Flood is a more streamlined survival experience.
This one looks fun.
Where you travel downriver with your trusty dog to survive an apocalyptic flood. It's a little more arcade style, but the actual survival elements are no joke. The next is Don't Starve, another more cartoony looking game that's got a lot going on under the surface. Don't Starve is an offbeat survival game where the simple act of not starving is the challenge. And few survival games are as purely entertaining as this one, because beyond the core premise, it's just fun to mess around in. And finally, it's Frostpunk, a unique one because while it looks like more of a city builder, the gameplay is entirely about survival. Instead of playing one dude trying to survive though, you play as an entire society. You build homes and structures, enact laws, make policy decisions, all while the world gets colder and the gigantic furnace at the center of the city needs more and more coal to keep everything running. It's a game about making hard decisions, and most of them end in disaster. It's a great game with a slick interface and a unique setting, but wow, is it ever bleak. You know a game is getting dark when literal cannibalism is considered a sensible option. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day.
I don't know. I guess I was thinking survival in a little bit of a different way, but this video was cool nonetheless, and I hope I delivered what you were looking for. Much love and light, and I definitely would have added in bonus. I would have added Subsistence in 7 days. They're intense. There's hypothermia and everything, and blood moons and those too, and they get pretty intense also, especially Subsistence. Subsistence is a really good game. You know, and so is 7 days, but I could be biased because they're games I like and they're not on the list. But I mean, I don't know. They need some shout outs. Anyways, much love and moonlight, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.